Thank you, Professor Dyson. Thank you for keeping to time as well. And thanks for all those really brilliant remarks. It has really piqued our interest in reading the book. Our second speaker is Professor Sanjay Kumar Sharma, and Professor Sharma is a historian, translator, and media practitioner, and currently a professor of history at Ambedkar University, Delhi. He has researched on aspects of famine, relief, food security, drought, and environmental degradation, state welfareism, and philanthropy in modern India. He's also interested in issues of poverty, hunger, disease, malnutrition, medicine in the colonial period, and has a wide area of interest, including in the state formation, popular culture, language, and media in northern India. He's also engaged with comparative histories of India, China, and Europe. I welcome and invite Professor Sanjay Kumar Sharma.
Thank you, Ritusha, very much for those kind words of introduction. I must say I'm really delighted to be here and to be made part of this panel to discuss Professor Bidyut Mohanty's major work, which I think many of us who teach modern Indian history, economic and social history, and I who also, I research on famines, offer courses on that. And as Professor Dyson said, this will go straight into all our reading lists. This was something missing. And let me begin by, recalling the 1980s, when I first heard about Professor Bidyut Mohanty from her supervisor, Professor Dharma Kumar, the eminent economic historian. After my post-graduation, from JNU, I happened to be Professor Dharma Kumar's research assistant. And in one of our discussions, I recall the Cambridge Economic History of India, Volume 2, which she edited, had just come out. And she mentioned that it was her great regret that there was no separate chapter on famines in that book. And she hoped that someone, she said, is working on the Orissa famine of 1866. And I remember she asked me, he says, you come from North India, there were so many North Indian famines, why don't you work on famines as well? So, which is what made me choose my research topic in the mid-80s. And I've persisted with that. So I must thank Bidyut ji for actually, I hadn't met her, but she was there. She was there working on this famine, and it as I said, it proved to be an inspiration of some sort. And Professor Dharma would talk about her work. She is no more with us, Professor Dharma, but I'm sure she would have been really and truly delighted with the publication of this book. Now, I think the significance of this book, its importance is in the fact, and I think it must have struck everyone, in the fact that it's an academic piece of work, but it is also layered and nuanced with years of work that she has done at the ground level. Her experience with working with Panchayati Raj, the institutions surrounding that, with women, with all kinds of other groups. So in that sense, the scope of this book is really wide, and it is an extremely rich book. And therefore, I wouldn't talk, it would be unfair to talk about this book in terms of its strengths and weaknesses in some senses. I think there are too many things at times she touches upon, and I think they open up doors for further research. And I will confine myself to just a few of these themes, which I found extremely rich, and I think which have the potential of generating more research in this area. Now, as a historian, therefore, I would mainly talk about the 1866 famine, and although the book, of course, talks about the period several decades after that, and raises and touches upon several contemporary issues which remain relevant. Now, this famine occurred under British rule, and as Ashwini mentioned, she found this dimension, not just a mention, a discussion of the creation of a new caste of people who ate in famine relief kitchens opened by the British administration, the Chhatrakhiyas. Now, I would like to say that in this sense, this famine actually is it's a milestone in British gratuitous famine relief policy. As we are all aware, and as various previous works have told us, that in the 19th century, state famine relief, as it evolved, it consisted of basically two parts. The British were absolutely averse to giving anything for free. A lot of this actually came post the 1834 New Poor Law in Britain, once it was revised, and the emergence of workhouses. Famines which occurred after that, and I've studied one of them, the 1837-38 famine in North India, that they claimed for the first time was a famine when they employed, and I'm using categories used then, the official categories, the able-bodied who could work, weakened definitely by famine and starvation and disease, but who could still work. The able-bodied were supposed to be, they were offered work on works of public utility in return for subsistence wages based on the principle of less eligibility. That is, if someone could find work in the labor market or otherwise, he or she was supposed to go there. But if you wanted to just somehow survive, you were set to work. Again, this is the term which was used. But the state did not enter the area of gratuitous charity at all, as it did in 1866 in the form of opening relief kitchens. So in that sense, this is a very, very important shift which happens a little later. So, but what I would just like to add is a certain comparative perspective here, that the idea that the state actually should offer work to those who are unable to work, that came up during the 1860-61 famine in North India. And specifically in the northwestern provinces district, the western UP district currently of Moradabad, where John Strachey, with the very able and very competent assistance of Syed Ahmad Khan, the great educationist and reformer, later on Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, he was the deputy collector of Moradabad, and together they put together the first, what they called poor houses. They were called Muhtaj Khanas in North India, and rules were laid down, and it was made very, very clear that anybody who came even to these relief kitchens, to these relief centers, some work would be extracted from them, even if they were not able-bodied. The able-bodied could be employed on works of public utility. So all poor houses were meant to be also workhouses. So what I think that what happens in the next major famine, which is 1866, is that when they do this, and this was tried in 1860-61 as well, cooked food was actually insisted upon as a measure of true need, because the British were aware that people are very conscious of their caste, and they wouldn't want to eat together, etc., etc. So if you were truly needy, now this was, you could say that this was really unkind, but it was a test which was instituted. The fact that if you are truly in need, if you are hungry, you must come and you must come and eat in these places. So I find that during this famine, when this is done and a new caste is created, I think that's a very very rich a piece of work that Bidyut has done, and it is actually interlaced. It's interwoven with literary references, all kind of anthropological material. I think it's a very very major contribution. I'm not undervaluing the work done in other chapters. But quickly, I would mention a couple of other things. Professor Dyson did mention about the Irish potato famine of the 1840s. I think that comparison I would like to see elaborated and developed a bit more. Someone else can do it. She mentions, and this is a very this needs further research. She says that uh, uh, colonialism in Ireland and colonialism in India, they both impacted, the two regions in some ways which are definitely well known. That is, for instance, the Irish famine had a very, very major impact in the ways in which Irish nationalism, subsequent political mobilization emerged. And for Odisha, as all people who know about Odia history know, how Odia identity and political mobilization, a lot of that was shaped by the experience of this famine. However, I think the context would still need further elaboration. English colonialism in Ireland, and also this suggestion. I was just wondering if this needs further investigation. That monocropping resulted in Ireland. It was. I think the suggestion is potato, and in Odisha it was rice. But I do feel that this is a very very major potential area of research. Another thing which Professor Mohanty has mentioned, and I think this is a very important field, which is that exploring the economic role of the Jagannath cult and the temple. Uh, I have seen mostly things written about the cultural and the social and the religious dimensions of this. But what role did Jagannath Temple play in the economy of Odisha is something which she hints at, and I would be very very keen to know more about it. Uh, uh, Finally, I would, Tusha, how much time do I have? I have exceeded my time.
Yes, you may take
I,
another minute to wrap
another
up.
minute.
Thank
Another minute. Yes. Uh, uh, there are comparisons in the book of Odisha with other parts of India, and I may have read this wrong, but the implication I thought, or the suggestion was that canal irrigation and commercialization of agriculture, railways in say Western India, or in other parts of India, it led to a reduction in the incidence of famine. Uh, if the suggestion is that if something like that had been done for Odisha as well, uh, situation in Odisha would have been much better. Now, I think this is something, I mean, we know from studies of Western India, the results of all this were extremely mixed. And whether something like this would have suited Odisha's landscape, its ecology, its flooding pattern, its rivers, is something that I think I would like to see someone coming up with more research in this area. So in the end, I can only congratulate Professor Bidyut Mohanty for this excellent work. It was waiting to be done. Despite so many works on famine, we still did not have a comprehensive book on Odisha, on the 1866 famine, and it's a very very major contribution. And I think to the current debates on not just on food security, access to food, aspects of gender, caste, etc., but to issues which are now being debated, like food sovereignty. And I think the book, therefore, it really opens up so many areas. And I think Bidyut ji needs to be really, really congratulated for this excellent piece of work. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. Our next speaker is Professor Jayantres. Professor Dres is a welfare economist, social scientist, and activist. He has worked on several developmental issues facing India, like social welfare and gender inequality. His co-authors include Nobel laureates in economics Amartya Sen, with whom he has written on famine, Nicholas Stern, with whom he has written on policy reform, when market prices are distorted, the Nobel laureate in economics August Deaton. He is currently an honorary professor at the Delhi School of Economics and a visiting professor at the Department of Economics, Ranchi University. Professor Dres is well known for his commitment to social justice, both in India and internationally. And apart from academic work, he has been actively involved in many social movements, including the peace movement, the Right to Information campaign that led to Right to Information Act in India, the Right to Food campaign in India, among others. As Professor Dres is not able to join us in person, he has sent a note expressing his thoughts on this book, and I'm going to read out this note for all of us. Thoughts on haunting tragedy. It is a sobering thought that not so long ago, famines occurred in India that killed up to 1/3 of the local population. The famine of 1866 in Orissa is one terrifying example, a haunting tragedy, as the evocative title of Bidyut Mohanty's book puts it. Historical record of this and other famines in the 19th century abound, but they are scattered in dusty libraries and obscure archives. Bidyut Mohanty has left no stone unturned to revive the facts of the 1866 famine. In this book, she presents an insightful and meticulous account of this event, or rather, process as she calls it. She also extends her analysis to other famines that have occurred in Orissa ever since. The book pays special attention to the gender, caste, and class dimension of a famine that naturally had very different effects on different sections of the population. As one might expect, the working class and oppressed castes were most exposed to starvation. The worst victims had to seek refuge in feeding centers, where they were barely kept alive by the colonial administration or charitable institutions. Some of them became outcasts because they had shared food there with people of other castes. They regrouped as a separate caste known as Kshatriya community, which survives to this day. The merciless nature of the caste system is visible in this characteristic act of persecution of the victims. The gender dimension of the famine receives a special attention in this book. Mohanty questions some of the received wisdom on this, such as the notion that female mortality typically increases less than male mortality in famine situations. Scrutinizing a vast amount of data and earlier studies, she concludes that much depends on the context. The female-male ratio in the population may or may not increase in periods of famine-related diseases. Even if the female-male ratio increases, it may be partly due to sex-selective migration. Famines have a deceptive simplicity. This enlightening study brings out that their genesis and effects are more complex than we tend to assume. There is much to learn from taking a closer look at the events and how they affected different sections of the population. As the author observes, this can also help in ensuring that tragedies of this sort do not happen again in the future. Professor Jayantres, Department of Economics, Ranchi University. I thank Professor Drej on all our behalves, and it's much appreciated that he was able to send this note to us. And moving on to our next speaker, this is Professor Pritish Acharya. Professor Pritish Acharya is a professor in history at National Council of Educational Research and Training, Delhi, and is presently posted at Regional Institute of Education, Bhubaneswar, a constituent of NCERT. As a writer in Oriya, he has published 3 short story collections. He has also written 2 collections of essays, translated works, and edited many volumes. He was awarded the Basanta Milan Puraskar for short story writing in 1986, and he's a regular columnist in Uriya. Some of his short stories are translated and published in various prestigious Hindi journals. Presently, he is working on the writings of Gopabandhu Das, a pioneer of nationalist struggle, basic education, nationalist press, and social reforms in Orissa. Professor Pritish Acharya, welcome. The floor is yours.
Respected Chair, now I see 121 people who have been there in the meeting. First of all, I congratulate Dr. Bidyut Mohanty, the author of this book, and thank her for asking me to participate in the discussion today. Further, I thank the Manohar publishers for bringing out this work at a time when the book publication faces a serious threat because of the closure of the university and college libraries for last 2 years due to COVID. We only hope that the pandemic is over soon and new academic works reach their rightful places in the public libraries. Divided into 11 chapters, Dr. Mohanty's work, A Haunting Tragedy, Gender, Caste and Class in the 1866 Famines of Orissa, is not only a thorough analysis of the Orissa famines, but it is also written in a free-flowing and easy styles for a non-specialist reader like me. It would certainly help us in comprehending the contemporary issues pertaining to food security in Orissa. We are of course aware of the starvation deaths in Kalahandi in the 1990s or the Nogoda deaths of the tribal children due to malnutrition in Jajpur district of Odisha in 2016 or the Dadan seasonal migration of low caste and low class people from western Odisha to the Bricklins in South India everywhere. The women of lower caste and classes with low entitlement to food and nutrition have been frequent victims in such situation. This could also be felt more terribly during the present COVID pandemic and the resultant lockdown, shutdown, nationwide train cancellation, and closure of schools, etc. Dr. Bidyut Mohanty transcends the regional boundaries of Odisha and analyzes the Bengal famine of 1943 and the Bangladesh famine of 1974 and also many other famines to highlight the universal nature of suffering in such historical episodes. The victim everywhere come from similar disadvantaged and deprived social groups and consequences are almost same. As a teacher educator concerned with school education, I know how the school closure and harnessing of the online digital mode for making up the learning deficit due to pandemic situation and offering it as a magic wand has a differential impact on the education of the girl students who naturally are more precariously placed due to gender bias and gender discrimination. Everywhere, the first generation schoolgoers from the lower caste and lower class social groups have been its worst victims. Though the 1866 famine is there in the title of the book, it's a detailed analysis of all the famines of Odisha between 1866 and 1921. They include the famine of 1898-99, 1907 and 08 and 1918. Food scarcities, famines had occurred in the distant and near past, but their frequency and intensity increased during the British rule, and it happened when England was becoming transformed as the workshop of the world during the peak period of industrial progress in Europe. With a major occupational shift of people from agriculture to manufacturing, the increasing number of people became concentrated in industrial centers and the colonial dependence for export of food grains also grew. On the other hand, the weavers and salt workers of Odisha, after losing their employment, also became dependent on agriculture, a sector where productivity was almost stagnant. There is a plethora of evidence to suggest that colonialism meant a loss of income and livelihoods for a vast chunk of indigenous people, despite the contrary presuppositions of colonial administrators and some scholarly discourses that British rule improved agricultural prosperity and general level of income of the peasant households. There was no Odia press, no democracy, no welfare state to take care of the impoverished multitude of people during the famine of 1866. On top of that, the top order bureaucracy had been greatly enchanted with the idea of laissez-faire free trade. Dr. Mohanty points out Mr. T. E. Revensa, the Commissioner of Odisha Division, and the actual decision taker during the famine of 1866, was a great champion of free trade and was reluctant to interfere in the rice transport, which aggravated the famine situation. Fakir Mohan Senapati, the celebrated author of Odisha then, was an eyewitness to the famine of 1866. He was 23 years old then and had been living in Balasore, a major hotspot of the famine. 50 years later, while writing his autobiography, he gave one whole chapter to describe the details about the famine. He partially blamed Revensa, T. E. Revensa, for the administrative mismanagement during the famine, but the blame was more on the lower level clerks and subordinate non-Odia native officials for misleading the naive, simple, and noble-hearted commissioner. It is, say, Fakir Mohan Senapati, he used to describe him, Revensa, as noble-hearted, who, as Fakir Mohan claimed, ushered the golden age of Odisha history. Fakir Mohan Senapati was not alone. The Odisha educated middle class of the time rewarded the commissioner by naming the only college of the state as Revensa College in 1879. Blaming the lower level officials for the crisis is one easy way of absolving the high official, the actual decision taker, who is seen as a superman who can commit no mistake. The scene has not changed even today in 21st century. Though the famine of 1866 has been more than 150 years old and the colonial rule elapsed from India nearly 8 decades earlier. The 1866 famine is known as Nongo Durviksha in Odia, a famine that occurred during the 9th year of reign of the Puri king Divya Singha Deva, who is idealized as the living incarnation of Lord Jagannath in local tradition. However, neither the princely family, nor the Jagannath temple, nor the innumerable modes of the religious shrines of the pilgrim city, Puri, came forward for opening chhatra or food relief centers with ample religious sanctity. If they had started the chhatras, the people reaching there for food out of compulsions might not have been dropped as chhatrakyas, a new social category considered lower than even the low caste during the post-famine period. In such a situation, probably the Kshatriyas' shame and guilt might not have been an issue. As the author, Dr. Mohanty, notices, there was hardly any such initiative, though Puri as a pilgrim city would absorb the famine victims in various employments, unlike other urban centers like Kotak, etc. Dr. Mohanty has analyzed how a structured caste system worked even among the already outcast Kshatriyas. The Dalits among them remained lower to other Dalit, non-Dalit Kshatriyas as noticed in the census of 1881. The famine and the resultant epidemics affected everyone, but the effects were far harsher and more severe on certain categories. This has provoked the author to look at the issue in terms of gender, caste, and class. The reports of the census commissioners show the death among the women as less than that of among the men. Dr. Mohanty concludes it is a myth and analyzes how the women's death was unreported and underreported. The argument that the women could easily adapt to food security and were less prone to infectious diseases is not tenable as argued by the author. The Christian missionaries had intensified in the 19th century their activities, which coincided with the end of monopoly trade and the beginning of free trade in colony. Further, it's a fact that the low caste and tribals have been mostly attracted to Christianity. Similarly, Oleg Dharma, a reformist religion which rejected idol worship, Brahminic supremacy, and caste system, originated in the 19th century Odisha. Like the Christianity, Oleg Dharma also attracted mostly the low caste and the tribals and the marginal peasants. Bhima Bhoi, the acclaimed Odia poet, was from the Kon tribal community, and his Mahima bhajans were the mediums for the spread of Mahima cult. Should I conclude or just 3-4 lines? Can you give me
So,
one? Should I?
yes, sir. Please conclude in 1 minute. Thanks.
Okay. He lived during the famine of 1866. However, while the missionaries are suspected and persecuted for alluring certain social groups to Christianity, the going of such social groups to Mohima Dharma is seldom proved by the hounders and persecutors. It is not only a specific famine, but the issue of prolonged food scarcity and perennial caste ignominy that pushes the people out of their Hindu faith. A Mohima sannyasi looking for alms for survival had neither the shame nor the guilt, unlike a Chhatrakhya. Dr. Mohanty examines the Dadan seasonal migration issue and the Sardar or labor contractor system prevalent in Western Odisha today. The women, the children, low caste and low class people are the worst victims there. This relates the past famine history with the present time. To me, this is the main strength of this marvelous publication. It has set the ways for others to follow, as there are many such hidden histories from across the nation still waiting to be written. Hopefully, such efforts of public intellectualism would be an antidote to the present state of despairing sloganism in the name of nationalism. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Uh,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Acharya. That's a very poignant storytelling style that you brought to your note on this book, and bringing the aspect of people's history through the stories of people that matter. Thanks a lot. Before I move on to the next speaker, let me bring in the fact that Professor Swarnamay Tripathi is going to handle the question answer session after the last speaker has spoken. So if the audience have any questions that they would like to write in the chat box, they may start doing so now, so that there is a smooth flow of the event, and Professor Swarnamay Tripathi has a head start in terms of identifying the questions. You may also alternately raise hands so that you can speak the question if you want to do so. Thank you for that. And now we are moving on to our last speaker of the day, Shri P. Sainath. He's a journalist and an author of the well-known book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought. He has reported on rural India, writing extensively about poverty, structural inequalities, caste discrimination, and farmers' protests. He has been awarded the Raman Magsaysay Award in 2007 for believing that journalism is for people, not for shareholders, and for writing about those who have been left behind. He's the founding editor of the People's Archive of Rural India, which was founded in 2014, an online platform that focuses on social and economic inequality, rural affairs, poverty, and the aftermath of globalization in India.